We will halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt.
Nothing's changed. The circus moves on, rinse and repeat.
We have an opportunity to become Europe's Silicon Valley.
We can perhaps be a broker of some sort with Ukraine.
We expect inflation to come off quite rapidly in the rest of this year. Obviously, we want to see that happen.
What we now need is a period of stable, quiet, serious government.
You're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Yuan Potts.
I'm Lizzy Burden.
And I'm Caroline Hepker.
Coming up on today's programme, we're going to take you through the latest UK jobs data and what they mean for the state pension and the triple lock, and therefore the already squeezed public finances. You'll remember the former Chancellor George Osborne once said that you should fix the roof while the sun is shining. But it reminds me, Caroline and Yuan, that the parliamentary roof literally needs fixing.
Yeah, so on the programme, we're going to be speaking to Alex Wickham about his great scoop, because politicians often come under attack for living a completely different life to the rest of us. But in the case of crumbling buildings, if anything, it's MPs who are working in worse conditions than most of us. RAAC, that troubling concrete building material, has been found in parliamentary buildings too.
Yeah, seems like rather bad luck, doesn't it? You wouldn't think there'd be a lot of concrete in the parliamentary buildings given its age. But yeah, the Houses of Parliament are in a pretty bad state. Since 2020, there have been 6 incidents of falling stonework, 10 fires and 1 potential asbestos exposure. And when you look at the costs of fixing it, well, it puts a few schools really in the rear view mirror. It would cost between 7 and 13 billion pounds. That's if all the MPs moved out to another city, which they said they don't want to do. If the MPs stay there, the cost could be 22 billion pounds.
But it's not just the cost, it's how long it would take. It's sort of 20 or 30 years conservatively, and perhaps 76 years if they actually stayed put.
It's funny how it really matters to you when it happens on your own doorstep, doesn't it?
Really?
Bringing the issue home. But there was also, speaking of appearances in Westminster, an interview in The Telegraph with a famous fashion influencer who's reviewed UK public figures and their suits. Did you see this?
I did. It's absolutely charming. This men's fashion influencer and blogger doesn't even seem to realise how famous he is. He's come up with an opinion on everything, but it's all about elegance. And the people that he picks out, it's just wonderful.
Well, he started with Philip of Spain's suit, didn't he, when he went to go and watch the tennis. And now it's expanded to the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg, the wearer of those famous double-breasted suits. I used to send those threads to my husband. I'm not sure if I want my husband to be modelling himself on Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Well, quite a lot of criticism seems to be levelled at the ill-fitting suit, or people who wear them too tight, like Daniel Craig, or slightly short tailoring on the trousers. And it's sort of minutely recorded, each of the different tailoring phrases, and he uses it also beautifully on Twitter.
Yeah, I wonder if some of those suits need levelling up. Can we use it in that context? He says that actually some of Rishi Sunak's trousers are a little bit shorter. We were talking about this earlier, weren't we, about this fashion for men's trousers being a little bit short, and I think it takes a certain man to carry it off, doesn't it?
The thing is, sometimes I see fashions now and I don't get them. I don't know what the conversation is in fashion terms, what it's telling me. But, and this is true of men's short trousers, I sort of don't understand the trend. But then I went to see Barbie, the movie, and of course Ken has slightly short trousers, so I did understand.
And he looks pretty good in them.
Oh, yes.
I have a confession that we might have to edit out afterwards, but I was having a conversation with the Chancellor, and he said that he inherited the decor from one of his predecessors, Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor in number 11 Downing Street. And I asked whether he also had short curtains. He looked bewildered, but I meant short like the trousers. And he just shuffled off.
Oh, my goodness. Anyway, lovely Telegraph piece, and very interesting if you're into tailoring, or even if you're not. Anyway, on to the official jobs data. Shall we analyse some of that? Signs that the labour market in the UK is cooling. Unemployment hit the highest level since 2021. Admittedly, not very high, but wage growth is actually still rising. It's still very hot, 7.8% from a year earlier. So actually maintaining the fastest pace on record. But whilst the data might not have moved the dial much for the Bank of England, because we're still expecting that quarter point interest rate increase on the 21st of September, you might conclude that the numbers matter more politically than they do economically, Lizzy.
Yeah, because to be honest, you've got two factors playing into this. First of all, wage growth obviously factors into inflation. And as we well know, it's the Prime Minister's top priority to halve inflation by the end of the year. But there's also the triple lock, this government guarantee that the state pension rises in line with whatever's highest of wage growth, inflation, or 2.5%. And the wage growth data is taken from this month of data that we got this morning. The figure that the Treasury uses, average weekly earnings including bonuses, was one of the few surprises in this number. It rose from 8.2% to 8.5% when economists actually thought that it was going to stay on hold.
Yeah, actually quite a big gap between the wage growth excluding bonuses and the one including bonuses. So the government probably kicking at itself that bonuses are included in the pension triple lock. I'm not quite sure what the thinking was on that, but that was probably set back in the days of the coalition when the triple lock was first introduced. But it all adds up to another headache for the Treasury. The Institute for Fiscal Studies' own sums say that this will cost an extra £2 billion in fiscal year 2024 to 2025 compared to previous official forecasts. And that's a pretty big price tag given the government's finances. Remember to listen back to our interview with Jeremy Hunt. We spoke to the Chancellor on yesterday's edition of the podcast.
So joining us this morning is the IFS research economist Heidi Karjaleinen. Good morning, Heidi. Thank you so much for joining us on your latest analysis around the triple lock. Bloomberg has reported that the Chancellor is considering cutting benefits in real terms to create headroom for other giveaways, possibly tax cuts. Can the government actually afford to maintain the triple lock?
Yeah, so when it comes to the triple lock and whether we can afford it, of course, to some extent, it is a political choice, and that's what it comes down to. You know, we have an aging population. That means that no matter how we increase benefits or the state pension every year, just because we have more and more pensioners and fewer working age people, that means that our spending on the state pension will increase. But what the triple lock does, that it increases state pensions faster than earnings, faster than prices, and so on, and really faster than the economy. So when it comes down to, can we afford it? Well, unless we increase taxes, unless we borrow more, or unless we make cuts elsewhere, there's going to be a lot of pressures on the state pension spending and on our public finances as in the future.
So, Heidi, are you kind of saying that it would be a political decision? It would be kind of unfair to maintain the triple lock if otherwise if you maintain it, you're giving them a bumper pay rise? Well, it really, it comes down to having to make difficult decisions around how are we going to fund it? Are we going to fund it by increasing taxes? Are we going to fund it by borrowing more? And of course, there could be cuts that are made to other parts of the state pension system. So, for example, it could be that the triple lock increases spending to the extent that then the government feels like they have to increase the state pension age sooner than what they have legislated at the moment. Or then it could come down to cuts in other parts of the in our spending, and that's things like working age benefits.
Hey, just give us a bit of a menu as to some of the things the government might do. Talk to us about the cost of say, reducing the triple lock or the benefit to the government finances of not increasing benefits in line with inflation? And what are some of the other options open to the government in terms of fixing their finances?
Yeah, so far we've calculated that since the introduction of the triple lock, so back in 2011 is when it was first implemented, the additional cost every year from the triple lock compared to earnings indexation or compared to price indexation is about £11 billion per year. Now, in terms of how much more we're going to be spending on the triple lock in the future is really uncertain. And that's one of the issues with the triple lock. So we've done some analysis looking at 2050 and modeling what we might think the level of the state pension is then. And the range that we came up with is that the additional cost from the triple lock at that point could be another £5 billion, or it could be £45 billion. So that just illustrates how much uncertainty the triple lock creates for the government when it comes to public finances. Now, of course, the government could increase the state pension in line with, for example, prices. That's what the government does in terms of when it comes to other working age benefits. The government could increase the state pension in line with earnings. But what the triple lock does is that it increases the value of the state pension relative to average earnings. And it does so in an unpredictable way. And it does so in periods of macroeconomic volatility when inflation is higher than average earnings growth, or when average earnings growth is lower than the 2.5%, which is the third part of the triple lock.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's odd, though, to talk about it as being unpredictable, given that, I mean, obviously we can't predict inflation or understand economic growth. And so inherently that the rise of pensions is going to be volatile. And the idea, we understand pensions, perhaps rising more quickly than wages. But actually, trying to understand pensions benefits is quite difficult. But if you compare pensions across different countries, the UK, for example, pensioners get more benefits from private pensions usually, or they're topped up by private pensions, not just state pensions. But overall, if you aggregate those two, the UK has a lower replacement rate, i.e. the money that you get when you're an old age pensioner is a smaller proportion of the amount of money you've earned during your working life than a lot of other European countries. In other words, what I'm saying is the counter argument, that perhaps what pensioners might say, which is that the money from government is not that much. How can we be arguing for it not to go up by the rate of inflation?
That is definitely true that the UK state pension is lower compared to some other countries, and especially kind of other European countries. Now, that is because the way that the UK state pension system is set up. As you said, in the UK, what's much more important is private pension saving. And yes, of course, one of the reasons why the triple lock was introduced was that the government's view was that actually, if we looked back in, compared the level of the state pension to what it was in the 1980s, for example, the value of the state pension, because it was only rising in line with prices rather than average earnings for a couple of decades, the value of the state pension had fallen even further relative to average earnings. So that was one of the arguments for the introduction of the triple lock, is that we want to make sure that the value of the state pension increases in line with average earnings, or increases faster than average earnings. But what I mean by unpredictability is that, if that is the government's goal, a policy goal, that we want to increase the value of the state pension in line with average earnings, the triple lock is only going to do that in years when the inflation is higher than average earnings growth, or in years when 2.5% is higher than average earnings growth. And of course, that is the part that's very unpredictable. And that is only going to happen in periods where there's a lot of macroeconomic volatility and sort of poor economic performance in overall. So that's what is kind of unpredictable and strange about the triple lock, is that we increase the value of the state pension relative to earnings in these periods when we are seeing poor economic performance in the rest of the economy.
So Heidi, if I'm Rachel Reeves and I'm dreaming of becoming the first woman Chancellor, and I can do anything to make this system make more sense, why not make it means tested rather than having it tied to inflation, wage growth, or 2.5%?
Well, I mean, means testing is, of course, what it does happen in some countries where the state pension part is means tested. Now, I think, again, the way that the UK pension system is set up is that the way we think about the state pension is that it provides this foundation that protects people to some extent, at least, from poverty, and it then creates this foundation for further private saving. And there are other issues when it comes to means testing. For example, you might end up in a situation where it doesn't make sense for someone to save privately, or it kind of reduces incentives for people to save privately in their pension if they know that well, if I don't save, then I'm going to get this money from the government. But if I do save privately, then I'm not going to get this money. So there are other issues that when it comes to means testing pension as well.
Heidi, we're a couple of months away from the Chancellor's autumn statement. Just talk us through some of the things he might want to do with taxation and some of the price tags attached. I'm thinking in particular abolishing inheritance tax has been, a flag has been raised for that. Talk us through some of the policies that he might approach.
Well, I think it's a little bit difficult and maybe risky for us to be speculating much on what the government is going to propose in a couple of months' time. Of course, as you flagged, we've been talking a lot about how there are a lot of issues that you could fix when it comes to inheritance taxes, for example. But when it comes to sort of the pension picture and these kind of debates around how much we should increase the state pension by every April, how much we should increase other working benefits by every April. I think really what I would like to see is the government taking a little bit more of a holistic view and making kind of more intentional choices. It doesn't really make sense. Now we're talking about, or there's been some speculation that potentially the 8.5% increase will not happen next year despite the triple lock, because that reflects bonuses to NHS workers. It reflects bonuses to civil servants this summer. And obviously 2 years ago, we also saw the government didn't stick to the triple lock because the COVID lockdowns were at that point affecting the average earnings growth figures. So there seems to be this sort of, uncertainty around whether we even implement the triple lock in the way that it's meant to be implemented, what that means for public finances, and so on. So I would like to see the government taking, making more intentional choices around, well, what do we want the level of the state pension be, and how do we get there in a way that doesn't create this level of uncertainty for individuals and for public finances.
Yeah, no, and I understand the criticism. I suppose, though, that's the politics of it, though, isn't it? That there are rules there until the government decides to break them, in the way that is perhaps, convenient to them, with the explanations that they are going to give, I suppose, if that's what they do. But I think fundamentally is the issue around pensions not simply to do with the fact that the UK has an ageing population, and at the same time we are pushing up retirement ages, and that's fundamentally, from the worker and the pensioner's perspective, that's the big issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've seen increases in the state pension age already. It's now legislated to go up to 68 by the 2040s. It still means that, the life expectancy growth in the UK has been much faster than the increase in the state pension age. So people are still spending a bigger proportion of their life above the state pension age. But as you said, I think this is one of the issues with the triple lock, is that it creates more spending on the state pension. It creates more uncertainty around how much we're spending on the state pension. And then that increases the risk kind of in the eyes of the working age population that, the only way that the government can afford the triple lock or this level of state pension in the future is by increasing the state pension age even further. And actually, we've done some quite interesting polling work looking at, how working age populations see the state pension in the future. And we found that about a third of the working age population do not think that the state pension is going to exist in 30 years' time. And that's, of course, worrying because, how do you save privately? How do you, put aside money for your retirement if you don't know whether the state pension is going to exist or not? And I think that's why, keeping the triple lock in this, which creates this uncertainty, which, for a lot of people causes a lot of worry about whether it's sustainable in the long run, that it adds that extra level of risk and makes it extra challenging.
Heidi, the big picture here is, of course, how fiscally constrained the Chancellor is going into the autumn statement on November the 22nd and the election expected next year. One big kind of debate has been how much headroom he has. We had an interview with him ourselves on yesterday's edition of the Bloomberg UK Politics podcast, which people can listen back to. And he said that even though GDP was revised by the Office for National Statistics, he doesn't actually see a lot of extra headroom for tax cuts or other giveaways in the autumn statement because of soaring interest rates blowing a hole in the public finances. Finally, what is your take on how much headroom Jeremy Hunt has?
Well, I think he's very much right there that, despite us seeing, small revisions to the GDP growth, which, is a welcome thing, of course, but still, we are in this situation where the government debt is at a level, and the government interest rate bill is at a level which is growing, and it's we went through a very long period of kind of the government predicting interest rate cost to the government to be much higher than it ended up being, because the period of low interest rates sort of continued much longer than what we expected. But we're now in the opposite situation, where actually the kind of headroom is getting smaller and smaller the longer this higher interest rate period is going to continue. So I think he's very much right in saying that, without making adjustments either in terms of taxes or in terms of spending, there isn't much headroom there for him when it comes to the autumn statement.
Okay, Heidi, thank you so much for being with us. Heidi Karjaleinen, who is IFS research economist. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, conference season is upon us, and as is traditional, the TUC gathering precedes the party political conferences with trade union members in Liverpool this year. And already there are complaints from two big union leaders that Keir Starmer is failing to set out a clear vision for power.
Yes, Sharon Graham, General Secretary of the UK's biggest union, Unite, urged the Labour leader not to simply follow the Tony Blair playbook. She says there's no point grasping for a policy mix that's stuck back down the back of a 1990s sofa. Well, for more on this, we're joined by our roving reporter, Eamon Farhat, who is in Liverpool. Eamon, thanks for being with us. Deputy Leader Angela Rayner's been speaking. What's her pitch to workers?
Yeah, so she basically gave this big speech just now. It's her big pitch on the New Deal for working people. It's this comprehensive plan to create more jobs across the UK and bring more security, end zero-hour contracts, bring an end to fire and rehire, and just repeal some of this anti-strike legislation that the Conservatives are trying to bring in. It was met with a huge applause. Everyone seemed really enthused by it. At the same time that you just spoke about Sharon Graham, who gave her speech yesterday when she made these comments, and she also got a standing ovation. So it definitely seems a bit of a split there with whether the union leaders seem keen or seem as if they trust this plan that Labour has to put forward. They definitely seem to trust Angela Rayner, but when you start talking about Keir Starmer, then the issue becomes a bit more difficult.
Well, you've been out and about speaking to delegates. Are they excited that the opinion polls point to a Labour election win?
I think, definitely excited. I think no one's really taking it for granted here. I think they're all just so worried that, if by any chance it doesn't go through, they know how damaging that will be for, themselves and the people they represent as well. They just know that they have to kind of get to the next stage and get a Labour government into power so that they can really move forward with the issues of pay and conditions for the working people. But yeah, they are definitely excited about that. I was talking to some of the general secretaries, and they know that once Labour is in power, they just have so much more of a say with government. At the end of the day, the Conservatives are really not willing to talk to the unions a lot of the time.
But you hinted about some dissatisfaction with Keir Starmer's leadership, criticism including from Mark Sawatka, who's the General Secretary of the PCS, that's the Civil Service Union. I mean, is that kind of his usual stance?
I think it's interesting because, you have some of the leaders. I just spoke to Mick Lynch just after the speech, and he, for a long time was quite critical of the Labour front bench. But even him right now, he really sees it as, we have to get them in. We do have to hold them accountable. We need to get them in above anything. And then we can start really kind of raising these criticisms. But yeah, when I spoke to Mark Sawatka, he was, really saying that, that in some ways Keir Starmer, by, U-turning on so many things, by trying to dilute some of his Labour policies, this could mean that he's already lost trust, and Mark Sawatka, who represents the PCS, the civil servants, this is not a union that's affiliated with the Labour Party, so he doesn't have to tell his members to vote for Labour, but it is a huge union. It's a lot of people, so definitely these kind of big union leaders, what they say does matter.
It's interesting because you'd think that unions would be happy that at least it's Labour rather than Conservatives if they did get into power. I'm just looking at some polling by YouGov that said the Labour Party and Keir Starmer are perceived to be much closer to the centre ground than the Conservatives. So you would think that that suggests that they're not as much to the left, and that won't please the unions. But it's interesting that you've got Angela Rayner doing the speech rather than Keir Starmer. Is that some sort of strategic move? Does she play better with the left, the unions?
I mean, everyone was talking about the fact that Keir Starmer, although he was here last night for this dinner, the dinner with all the general secretaries, he didn't give the main speech. That being said, it's not completely abnormal. It is the first time that he hasn't given the speech in the time that he's been the leader. But at the same time, even when Jeremy Corbyn was leader, sometimes he would give it to John McDonnell. So it's not completely abnormal. That being said, I think that if Keir Starmer had given that speech just now, I don't think the reception would have been so great. I mean, even Keir Starmer did give a speech last night at the dinner, and I did hear that it maybe wasn't the most interesting or enthusiastic speech received from the delegation who were there.
Now, Eamon, I want to get onto, you mentioned the dinner, I want to get onto the important questions now. Were you invited, and what was on the menu?
We were not invited. All the journalists were shipped up to another dinner that was very far away from the real big dinner, so that was not too fun. But we did end up kind of in the same bar as where they were trailing out from this big dinner. Apparently, they had some very rubbery chicken and rubbery meat, so not the best food. Lots of speeches were given. I think Paul Novak, who's the general secretary of the TUC, apparently gave an amazing speech. Also came out that he's maybe a Taylor Swift fan. And yes, Keir Starmer gave a speech, a lot more serious apparently. And yeah, a lot of these union leaders who I was speaking to after this dinner at 1 a.m. were saying that although, it's it maybe wasn't the most fun, Keir Starmer isn't maybe the most fun person, and maybe they don't agree with everything he has, they really do respect that he is a Labour leader. Labour and the trade unions have to work together, and they have to get him into power. So there is that kind of respect for this kind of statesman that's coming along.
Okay, who knew the unifying factor between Tories and Labour would be Taylor Swift? Rishi Sunak is a fan, apparently. Well, just lastly then, as we say, this is the kind of lead up into the big conferences. What do you take away as the atmosphere there? I mean, I'm surprised that you're not saying that there isn't more excitement given the polling.
Yeah, I think the atmosphere definitely is one of excitement. I mean, I think in the closing remarks that Angela Rayner just gave now to the main floor, she did say that we are now kind of the election is coming and we have to now stand united, and everyone stood up and cheered and was very, very excited. But at the same time, there is just this kind of worry that you have to enthuse people, you have to enthuse working people to make them vote. And if there's any chance, even though the polling is this much ahead, that it doesn't go the way that, they want it to, this is just going to be so damaging after 13 years of so much damage for these working people. So I think there's just a little bit of worry, I guess, as well as the excitement.
All right, Eamon Farhat, our roving reporter, joining us from Liverpool. Thank you so much. It's interesting to think that even if Labour can win power, that may be when the problems begin, because they're all cobbling together to get it over the line, but it's a very broad church, far left up to centre to hold together.
Yes, but that's always the pressure of an incoming government, that you must then repay all of the various groups who have managed to get you elected. I mean, that's a common issue, isn't it?
Yeah, there are lots and lots of people to please, but no money to please them with.
Yes, absolutely. Look, that's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by James Walcock, and our audio engineer was Maruful Hussain. I'm Yuan Potts.
I'm Lizzy Burden.
I'm Caroline Hepker. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.